Did you know that whales used to walk? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about Paleogene life. Paleogene was the first period in the Cenozoic era, the era that we are currently in Earth's history, and it went from around 65 to 23 million years ago. It used to be called the Tertiary back when it was combined with the Neogene, and you might know that name instead. But basically, the Paleogene is a period that includes epochs, the Paleocene, Eocene, and Oligocene. The major life, geological, and climatic events that happened during this period in Earth's history include sand dollars colonized sandy shores. Wow, we're starting off with a bang. I promise it gets way more interesting than that. Sand dollars are cool, don't get me wrong, but there's more things. Giant sharks, here now we're getting somewhere. Birds radiate, and there were huge flightless predators that literally were like huge ostriches that would run around and chase like horses and eat them. Like I don't even know how to respond to that. That was what was on the previous slide if you don't know, but we'll get into that. And mammals radiated. If you don't remember, radiate just kind of means like rapid diversification. So mammals were going to town. Angiosperms and grasses radiate. If you remember from the Cretaceous videos, I did talk about angiosperms evolving then, but grasses, for the first time ever, had their moment to shine in this period, the Paleogene. And then for climatic events, we had the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. There was also a warming period in the early Eocene. There was also an Eocene-Oligocene cooling period and end Paleogene glaciation. And tectonically, there was the Laramide orogeny, plus a bunch of other stuff, but these are just the main things I'm listing here. But in today's video, again, we are not focusing on these last three things, climate or tectonics. We are going to be focusing on the life events. So biologically, what was going on in the Paleogene. And in a different video, I talk about climate during the Paleogene. And in a whole separate video, I talk about tectonics, paleogeography, geology, etc. So we ended in the Cretaceous videos with some pretty nasty extinctions at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary when an asteroid hit Earth and caused a bunch of climatic events that were devastating for life. But marine life recovered pretty quickly afterwards, and magnesium-calcium ratios in the ocean were higher at that point, causing corals to be the major reef builders instead of rudists, which were the major reef builders during the Cretaceous. If you remember, the reason is because higher magnesium to calcium ratios favor calcitic precipitation, and so organisms that precipitate calcite, like corals, would make, a lot of reefs and whatnot, which is what's happened since the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary and throughout the Cenozoic until now, and that's why we have coral reefs. However, during the Cretaceous and many other times throughout Earth's history, magnesium to calcium ratios were lower, such that aragonite precipitation was favored instead of calcite. Those are two minerals that have the exact same chemical formula, calcium carbonate, but different structures. And so because aragonite was favored during the Mesozoic, largely in the Cretaceous, during the Cretaceous, rudist reefs, rudists are these organisms here in the fossil record that are bivalves, those guys were the dominant reef builders during the Cretaceous, but they went extinct at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary, which is a little sad, but not that sad because we have coral reefs now, which are amazing. Well, not for long, but we won't focus on that. Anyway, we have those. Let's just appreciate them while we have them. Arguably, though, the most drastic change in the oceans from the Mesozoic to the Paleogene was that marine mammals took the place of marine reptiles. Marine reptiles were these like massive predators and, just massive whale-like creatures in the Cretaceous and throughout the Mesozoic. But in the Paleogene and throughout the Cenozoic, obviously we have now marine mammals that take the large marine life niche now. And whales actually evolved from carnivorous land mammals like this hoofed guy up here to the right. I mean, what? It's very counterintuitive to think that life was walking on land to go back into the ocean, because technically all the walking life came from the ocean originally, so it seems very backwards, but it turns out that's not the only time that has happened. Other marine mammals had the same thing happen. Well, some of these diverged after they went back to the ocean, so not all marine mammals came from a singular individual land mammal, but a few did, and that's all that was needed to start this whole revolution of marine mammals. And during the early Cenozoic, during this Paleogene period, whales were actually top predators, and joining them in top predator spot were huge sharks. So remember Megalodon? Well, yeah, it is real, but it's not current. Carcharadon megalodon, I think I'm pronouncing that right, that species did exist, but it was actually existing during the Paleogene. And for scale, here's a human and a modern great white. Yes, that is a huge shark. So they and the whales took the place as the top predators during the Paleogene after marine reptiles gave up that place due to their extinction at the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. But like I mentioned when I was listing out events at the beginning of this lecture, it's not all about sharks. Sand dollars also made major progress, and we have to appreciate them as well. Sand dollars, if you don't know, are echinoderms that look like this picture here in the middle, the one with the like star thing in the sand. Those are sand dollars, and they evolved from sea biscuits in the Paleogene. And this picture down here in the middle just shows that new bivalves also evolved, and these two groups took over sandy marine shorelines, and that is because they were shallow, rapid burrowers. They could rapidly burrow themselves back into the sand after waves displaced them in order to protect them from predators or what have you. Unrelated biologically, but related in terms of shorelines or margins of the oceans, were penguins. They also evolved and, took over some of the ocean margins as well. And pinnipeds, which is a group that includes walruses, seals, sea lions, etc., also potentially evolved, but this isn't actually totally proven that they evolved in the Paleogene. Many people think it wasn't until the Neogene, but many people think the fossil record's fuller in the Neogene, but they actually evolved in the Paleogene. So potentially pinnipeds also evolved alongside penguins during the Paleogene, at least the later Paleogene. Plants underwent some major changes though as well. Angiosperms dominated after the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, and as you remember in the Cretaceous videos, I talked about how angiosperms evolved and were rapidly successful due to the way they reproduced, fertilized, and basically manipulated insects into pollinating for them, and gymnosperms and ferns became less abundant and less dominant after that extinction event and allowed angiosperms to radiate. Another event during the Paleogene is that forests took on a more modern appearance. I talk in my Paleogene climate video about how the warming to cooling trend during the Eocene to Oligocene caused a lot of the tropical forests that were really abundant and densely populated in North America and Eurasia during the Paleocene and Eocene epochs transitioned into more dry woodlandy type forests in the Oligocene due to cooler and drier climates. Grasses, however, were also a major event in the Paleogene. Now, you might not think that grasses sound that exciting, but guys, grasses did some crazy things in the Paleogene that changed Earth forever. Literally, it changed Earth into like its modern setting environmentally, which is pretty major. So grasses were a major event. Basically, they were the last major plant group to evolve. They also originated in the Cretaceous like angiosperms, but were confined to woody, swampy areas because it wasn't until they evolved continuously growing leaves that they could grow into like huge grasslands and survive heavy grazing. Until they did that, they would get grazed and then be dead. So when they evolved the continuously growing and regenerating leaves, they were able to survive heavy grazing and spread to form vast grasslands on which many co-evolving ungulates were grazing. And again, the switch from warmer to cooler and drier climates from Eocene to Oligocene helped grasses and dry woodland type forests to dominate over tropical plants and forests. Now, mammals, however, are going to be our major focus for today because, oh my word, they underwent some major adaptive radiation or rapid diversification during this time. If you look at the Cretaceous here, you will see a pretty barren spot here. We got multi-turbiculates, but other than that, you don't got much in the Cretaceous period for mammals. However, when you reach what is abbreviated here as Paleo, it's the Paleocene epoch, that is when we see all of these other mammal groups evolve, which is why it's called the Age of Mammals. And this was largely due to the continental split, which allowed for greater speciation. Speciation is a way that populations can diversify and become a new species, because when you have a continent split and a population splits, then that population undergoes changes in natural selection for a long period of time, isolated from the other population. And by the time they reach the other population again, they can no longer reproduce. That is the creation of a new species. And those continental splitting events caused a lot of speciation, and also the lack of dinosaurs allowed mammals to take over the terrestrial realm, where if they had tried to do that in the Cretaceous, for example, like this little multi-turbiculate here, he would have gotten eaten by the dinosaurs. So thankfully the dinos were diminished in the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction so that we could evolve. Major groups of mammals that evolved in the Paleogene include carnivores, bats, primates, rodents, rabbits, even toed ungulates and odd-toed ungulates. We'll get to what those are in a second. And whales, and also elephants, which are kind of ungulates, but a different group of ungulates. I'll get to that in a second. But all of these guys evolved in the Paleogene and, diversified from there. And we'll talk about those now. Bats represent when mammals took to the air, and they were the fourth group to develop powered flight. Now, if you remember from my evolution and phylogeny video, flight is a trait that everybody wants. You can look down on your prey easier, you can get away from your predators easier, and that is why flight has been at the center of many convergent evolution events. Convergent evolution, if you don't remember, is the opposite of divergent, so diversification of organisms from one ancestor. It's when multiple lineages evolve the same trait, and flight obviously is one of those traits that would happen in convergent evolution because everybody wants to be able to fly. So bats were the mammals that became the flyers. Dinosaurs also evolved flying counterparts, aka birds, and many reptiles during the Mesozoic also evolved the ability to fly. And obviously you also have like your insects and things. But anyway, flying is something that has evolved many times. Bats represent one major time that this happened, and they used a membrane attached to their four elongate fingers. You can see a fossil bat right here, and man, its fingers are long. Next, we have the primates. Paleocene, Eocene primates were small tree dwellers that looked a little like squirrels, and here's a fossil one down to the right. Oligocene primates, however, after the Paleocene, Eocene, became a little bit more monkey-like or ape-like, and then in the Neogene, after the Oligocene, apes underwent considerable diversification, and this is what we're going to be talking about in the Neogene life video, or I might have a whole separate video about Homo sapien evolution during the Neogene, and then a different, other life in the Neogene video, because there's just so much to talk about when it comes to human evolution, but I won't get into that here. Basically, primates evolved in the Paleogene, and then they became a little bit more modern monkey and modern ape looking in the Oligocene or late Paleogene. Ungulates are next, and ungulates include hoofed herbivores, which evolved in the Eocene, and these include even-toed ungulates and odd-toed ungulates. Even-toed ungulates are camels, deer, cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, bison, etc. And odd-toed ungulates are horses, tapirs, and rhinos. If you don't know what a tapir looks like, it kind of looks like this ancient elephant here. But elephants are actually not even or odd-toed ungulates. There's different classification schemes, but what I found was that they're in a third group of ungulates called the uranotheria, and that includes elephants, manatees, and dugongs, as well as some other things I didn't know what they were. But these are the main ones I think you would know. Dugongs look like manatees, and again, like I showed on the previous slide, manatees evolved from walking land mammals, and that is why they can be in the same classification as elephants, which obviously do walk on land. Well, elephants also swim, but oh my gosh, what if elephants evolved the ability to go be marine life in the future? That would be so cool. You just wish you could live millions of years in the future just to see. But this group of ungulates, the uranotheria, actually evolved before the beginning of the Eocene, around 60 million years ago, so right at the beginning of the Paleogene in the Paleocene epoch. In the Oligocene, after the Eocene, remember this is going from the Eocene, which was 55 to 35-ish million years ago, then 35 or 34-ish to 23 million years ago was the Oligocene. This is when ungulates continued to become more modernized. The horse family, for example, had disappeared from Eurasia during the Eocene, and few horses survived in North America, and they became larger through their evolution. And we can see in these images here in the Eocene, this little horse here was like less than 2 feet. And then in the Oligocene, it got a little bigger, around 3 feet. And then in the Miocene, which is in the Neogene, which we'll talk about later in next Neogene videos, it got 4-ish, 5-ish feet. And then modern day horses are obviously 5 to 6 feet tall. But horses aren't the only ungulates that became more modernized in the Oligocene. Rhinos also became, some of them became more modernized, but some of them were just super successful but didn't look like modern rhinos at all, such as the picture shown here. These don't look like modern rhinos, but they were super successful and absolutely huge. They're called Paraceratherium, and they represent the largest mammal of all time. This rhino that didn't even really have a horn. I mean, how was that even a rhino? But apparently it's a rhino. And it stood nearly 5.5 meters tall, or 18 feet. That's a lot of feet, guys, or a lot of meters. But there were also other large mammals that evolved during this time, including this one. This one's just the most noteworthy one in my opinion. And I'll get to more of the larger mammals when we get to the carnivores. But for a second, let's go to the other end of the spectrum with rodents. Rodents also evolved in the Paleogene, and you might find this weird because I did talk about rodent-sized mammals that existed before the Paleogene in the Mesozoic. But those were actually just rodent-sized mammals. They weren't actually technically rodents. These were called multituberculates, and there were a couple other mammal types in the Mesozoic, but these were the major group. And this multituberculate group actually was not very successful at the beginning of the Cenozoic. After the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, multituberculates were hit hard and declined rapidly, but during their decline, Paleogene rodents were very successful. So, pros and cons. Both groups had teeth good for gnawing seeds and nuts, but rodents had continuously growing teeth so they wouldn't wear down. This gave them a distinct advantage over the multituberculates, and multituberculates ended up going extinct in the Oligocene while rodents continued to diversify. Now getting into the carnivores. Carnivorous mammals in the Paleocene and Eocene included mesonychids and creodonts. Creodonts looked a little like this big cat here, but it wasn't technically a saber-tooth cat just yet. But mesonychids included a group called Andrewsarcus, which is shown here to the right and was actually the largest known terrestrial predator of the early Eocene. This says Earth Eocene. Sorry, that's supposed to say early. It resembled a dog, but also a little bit like a hyena. Its shoulders were kind of higher than its back end, and it stood nearly 2 meters tall at its shoulders, or 6 feet. So imagine like a 6-foot person and then make it into like a big hyena or dog that was going to kill you. That's terrifying. But then in the Oligocene, carnivora, which is the group of carnivorous mammals that includes those that live today, evolved saber-tooth tigers, bear-like dogs, and wolf-like animals, all the while becoming a little bit more modernized. For example, this saber-tooth cat looks a little bit more like the major top predator cats that we have living today, lions, tigers, the like. But this Andrewsarcus doesn't look a lot like any of the things we have today. I mean, a mix between dog and hyena, sure, but like not very similar compared to those in the Oligocene. But other than walking whales, the real thing that got me while researching for this video was the huge predatory flightless birds. I mean, I don't even have to say anything. You can just look at this picture and then be terrified, because that bird right there is picking up a horse. I mean, it's picking up a horse. These were called diatrymas or diatrymas or diatryms. I don't know, but that's how you spell it. And they evolved in the Paleocene. And what I think is really cool is that they continued the dinosaurs' legacy of being top land predators into the Cenozoic after most of the dinos went extinct. So it was kind of like they were continuing their legacy, because they are, after all, dinosaurs, birds of dinosaurs. But today's birds, we look at them and we're like, those aren't dinosaurs. I mean, we think of dinosaurs dinosaurs, you got to think of like huge, cool, thing that's going to eat you. But these guys, live up to the dinosaurs' legacy of being terrifying and huge. But luckily for us, they went extinct in the late Eocene. And you might think it's cool to have those guys around now, but I mean, have you ever been to like where you feed the animals and you have like an ostrich poke its head into your door? Now imagine if that ostrich like literally picked up your car and ate you all. I mean, just be thankful. However, these guys weren't the only huge birds around. Even flying birds during the Paleogene were very large. Small songbird type birds that we have today did not actually evolve yet. So imagine a world filled with only really large birds, no small birds that tweet around you and make beautiful song. I mean, cool, but also kind of sad. And that is all for this video, guys. I do have my major reference, the Earth System History book, linked in my description below if you want to check it out, as well as other minor and supporting references. And if you want to check out the other videos I'm doing about the Paleogene, I talk about Paleogene climate, like the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum and the Eocene-Oligocene cooling event in that video, all about Paleogene climate. And then I talk about Paleogene geology, paleogeography, and tectonics in the other Paleogene video. That all of these videos, if they're not up here on the screen, you can check for them in my historical geology playlist, which should pop up on the screen anytime now. But these two videos, if they're not on my channel just yet, should be out very soon. And with that, guys, I thank you guys so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you guys next time. Bye!